Mike, it is time for a rematch. A few years ago, we got together pretty much every vehicle in the small, mid-size-ish SUV segment, and the Nissan Rogue beat the Forester, coming in third place, but things are a little bit different now.
Yeah, back then we had the last generation Forester, and it was pretty much in its final year, and it still came mid-pack, but a lot's changed. It is completely new. It has new styling, and it has a new interior, and the Rogue's also been updated. So although it seems very specific, these are sort of the vehicles that sell in high numbers for these manufacturers because they don't have hybrid options like pretty much every other competitor.
Yet.
Yes. So before the plug-in and the hybrid show up, it's time to get them together and see what is the best non-hybrid, mid-size, compact.
That's a lot of adjectives. How about we just...
T-powered.
Yeah. This one has a turbo. All right, let's just hit the road.
This one has 4 cylinders.
Now, the Rogue did come in for a facelift last year, but it is a subtle one. Unless you're a huge Rogue fan, which those exist, right? There's not a whole lot to really tell it apart from the previous model. Now, the big tell is the grille, of course, and it's different. Mike doesn't necessarily enjoy this new treatment. I like it. I feel like it's a little more modern. It's a little more subtle than the original big, thick bar V that was going on before. And then down here in the lower section of the bumper, it is redesigned as well. Nissan has given up on even pretending that this is really an off-roader, so it's gotten rid of the faux skid plate. Of course, now there's a Rock Creek edition, which is more rough and tumble, so that's the one you get if you want that sort of thing. I also can't forget that, well, these are the headlights, not these. Nissan kind of pioneered this trend, and what do you know, the Forester's now doing it too. You have 19-inch alloy wheels, which are a really, really nice looking two-tone multi-spoke deal. They're gonna be a pain to clean, but that's not my problem right now. And then of course, I mentioned the Rock Creek earlier, and this takes the Rock Creek's new Baja Storm paint and applies it to the Platinum, and you get the two-tone roof, which is a nice classy touch too. Just a little bit of chrome up here just to kind of set it apart, and of course it keeps this little chrome garnish down on the lower door. I really appreciate that Nissan stretches the door sills all the way down and around the bottom of the vehicle, so when I open the door like so, when I get in, I'm not getting the back of my pants all dirty. That's a nice touch. It's not really a design feature per se, but I really want to point out that Nissan is one of the few brands that has rear doors that open almost a full 90 degrees, which just makes it easier to get in and out of. If you appreciated how subtle the changes were to the design up front, well, boy, do I have good news for you, because it's almost entirely the same in the back too. Now, the Rogue has a pretty identifiable back end because it's kept the same basic shapes for 2 generations now. They're a little more tighter and angular than the previous generation, but I mean, you know, largely, it's an SUV. It's a 2-box design. Nissan's not going wild with it, and that's fine because this is its best seller. It says Rogue, Platinum, so everyone knows you bought the top model. And yeah, that's about it.
Subaru is one to never really radically redesign things. Their styling refreshers are always very conservative, but this new Forester has one of the biggest departures from the brand styling in quite some time. Starting with the headlights, that C-shaped headlight, it's gone. There's a solid LED bar here, then the bulb beneath, and the fog light down there. The grille with its multi-slats, that's very different as well. Down here in the bumper, they have these little inserts which have shown up in other vehicles. I'm not a big fan because you can actually see the different pieces of plastic, and they're just obviously inserts, like I said, because they could be different colors and styles depending on trim, but it doesn't look high quality meshed together, but forget about that. Moving to the side, although this is an all-new Forester, you can see from its profile, it's very similar to previous models. It's still built on the same platform, just heavily updated. So the shell is very similar, but to even break that up, they've added this little plastic strip that goes on top of the pillar to look like it's breaking up the fender of the pillar. Same thing in the back. They have one here that's doing the same sort of function, and it actually has a symmetrical all-wheel drive badge. Instead of having one on the trunk, there's now one on either side because it's symmetrical. So the back end of the Forester is a mix of new and old. So things that are familiar, the spoiler. Every Forester has had a spoiler, or at least the option of one, and a couple generations ago, it started to have these side sills that help with aerodynamics. The taillights though, those are completely new. New design, new style. They're connected by a plastic bar that has the Subaru logo in the middle, and then Forester is actually imprinted in the liftgate in giant lettering. The only thing I don't like has to do with the exhaust. I like that Subaru has a real proper exhaust with a proper tip exposed. No fake exhaust here, that's great. But the styling around it and the Mimic on the other side, it gets to be symmetrical, but it's the plastic on top of plastic on top of plastic, and I'm not a huge fan. And Subaru used to have a cutout cover on the Forester when it had a dual exhaust option. So it kind of reminds me of that, and I just don't really like it. I think they could have done away with that sort of trim and just had a nice solid bumper with a single cutout.
Now, both of these are CVTs, and they're pretty good examples of CVTs, but when you really need it, the Rogue simply has more power. That being said, it is actually noisier when you're really gunning it. Throughout regular day-to-day activities, it is the more refined, quieter engine because while it is just a 3-cylinder, it is turbocharged, so it has a thick wad of torque, low down, but here on the highway when I have to push it, it's a little noisy. But the trade-off with that noise is that it is better when the time comes for passing because, well, it has 201 horsepower and 225 pound-feet of torque, which are both better figures than the Subaru. In the case of the torque, you're looking at almost 50 pound-feet more. CVT otherwise does a really good job, though. It stays as low as the rev range really needs for whatever you're doing at the time, and so it just maintains that quiet equilibrium that the Rogue does so well. Now, Subaru does make the most of what it has out of its powertrain. Yes, there is 2 less horsepower this year, so you're looking at just 180 horsepower, which is one of the lowest figures in the class. And then torque is up 2 pound-feet, so it's 178. You don't notice that deficit as much as it might seem when you're driving these two vehicles in the city. Again, because they both have CVTs, they're pretty darn responsive. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that while the Rogue's powertrain is the preferred one for both of us in this week-long comparison, the NHTSA does have an ongoing investigation into Nissan's variable compression engines, including the 1.5-liter 3-cylinder in here. There have been some owner complaints, and so it's something to keep in mind if you are considering a Rogue.
So a lot's always been said about how great Subarus are in the snow, and luckily we have some snow here, so we're gonna test it out. We're gonna put the Forester up against the Rogue in a sort of mini little straight line test. I'll be in X mode, Kyle will be in snow mode. So, we ready, Kyle?
I'm ready.
All right. So inside, the Forester and the Rogue go about the same mission in very different ways. So let's start with the Forester since that's what I'm in right now. The interior is a lot like the exterior, and there's new and old. So starting with things that are familiar is the center screen. It is the giant vertical rectangle screen that's in pretty much every other Subaru product, and the Forester is one of the last holdouts not to have it, and now it does. Kyle doesn't like this system or software much. I don't really have a problem with it. He prefers the one in the Rogue, which also uses a rectangular screen, but it's horizontal. And personally, I don't like that one as much. We can both agree, though, that neither of these systems are exactly class-leading. What this new screen and system does bring to the Forester is some more modern touches. For example, the toggle seat heater switches are now gone. It's now built into the screen, and it does have a couple physical buttons for a volume knob and a tuning knob, which is a huge plus, as well as temperature controls. And in the Rogue, you don't have that tuning knob. I would say the positioning of Nissan's screen compared to Subaru's looks a little more elegant and a little more modern. Subaru does a good job fully incorporating it into the dash, which a lot of manufacturers don't do, especially one this size. And the way the vents are situated around it, there's a cool little style piece across the dash in front of the passenger, and there's some faux wood underneath. It's a nice looking interior, but the Rogues does just feel a little nicer looking, a little nicer feeling, and just a little more premium.
Now, I'd love to tell you that braking performance is very different between these two, but I'd be lying. The pedal feel is largely the same. They're very smooth and progressive and easy to learn. It's not going to be a problem for anybody getting into either of these cars. There is one important difference that should be pointed out though, and that has to do with both vehicles' start-stop systems. Now, the Nissan's is pretty traditional. You come to a stop, you put your foot on the brake for a reasonable amount of pressure, definitely enough to keep the car at a stop, right? And then the engine turns off. Done. The Forester is just a little different because it seems to need two different levels of pressure depending on what you want, which could be a positive or a negative depending on how you look at this. So for me, I don't apply a ton of pressure when I'm at a stop. It's just enough to keep the vehicle still. That works for the Rogue, and then when I lift off, the engine starts back up and I get going. With the Forester, you actually have to make a concerted effort to push further down to get the start-stop to actually function. Now, again, sort of like the transmission, you'll probably get used to it if you own it, and I know some people don't even like start-stop. So maybe it's not too much of a problem for you. I live in a big city. I spend a lot of time stuck at lights or just in traffic, so I want that working, and it's just a little odd for me because no other vehicle really does it except Subaru. Also, I should point out that if you are using the Forester start-stop system, Subaru's is one of the more dramatic, so you definitely hear and feel the engine start up every single time.
As far as seat comfort, well, it depends on who's driving and which vehicle. I think it's pretty close. I might give the edge to Subaru though, because I feel more confident from a mental standpoint. And that's because, as I say in pretty much every Subaru review, the greenhouses are so giant in these vehicles because of the boxer engine allowing the hood and cowl to be low. I can see everything so easy, which makes driving it so easy, which puts you more at comfort. In the Rogue, forward sight lines are good, but the ones out the side and 3/4 and rear aren't nearly as good. And when driving in unfamiliar areas, especially at night, you just don't feel as confident as to what's around the vehicle. I mean, it's a minor thing in the difference, but it's something you notice. Now, Nissan wins the tech game handedly. It has a fully digital configurable gauge cluster. Subaru has a little digital screen in the middle, but otherwise it's analog gauges. I mean, that's a preference thing, but there's more you could customize into what you want to see with the Rogue. The Rogue also has options that you can't get on any level of Forester. This is the Limited, which is the second from the highest. In Canada, Premier, US, it's the Touring. But the Rogue we have on hand is the Platinum, which is the highest. It has features like a third zone climate control for rear seat passengers and window shades and things that just don't come on the Forester no matter what trim or package you buy. Also, it has a proper panoramic moonroof and not this 1.5 sunroof that's in the Forester, and it has a power reclining cover, whereas this has a manual cover. Now, features that I find are pretty important for this segment, they are included in this trim of the Forester. That includes things like heated rear seats, memory seats up front, you have the power lockable rear lift gate, this has a driver monitor system, navigation, things like that. But like I said, if you max this out, it's still not going to go option to option with the Rogue. From a safety standpoint, they're both fully loaded with all the latest technology.
Now, I do have to give Subaru props. No word of a lie. The Forester is much quieter inside than before. And of course, one of the great Subaru strengths is that it has this limber, loose, easy to get along with daily ride that the Rogue just can't quite match. They're both very similar on the highway, but in the city with these larger wheels, the Rogue is just a little bit more stiff. It's totally acceptable for a daily driver, but driving them back to back, you do notice these things. The highway is where both of these SUVs excel, and let's be honest, it's where a lot of time is going to be spent in either one for most people. Now, up at highway speeds, the Rogue is a little bit quieter than the Forester. You get some road noise, but there's very little in the shape of wind noise, or I guess sound of wind noise. Whereas the Forester gets a little, well, noisy right around the side mirrors and just at the top of its A-pillar. Now look, neither one of these are particularly sporty, and that's fine. That's the goal of this segment. If you want sporty, Mazda will sell you a CX-5 or a CX-50. The Rogue is a little bit more aloof. It feels a little bigger than the Forester. Both of them have very light steering. It's very quick and easy and accurate. So there's not a lot of difference there, but you just feel a little more up and away from what's going on in the Rogue. And maybe that's a good thing for you. Maybe you want that isolation. Maybe it feels a little more premium, luxurious. But that is the case, where the Forester just feels a little closer and in tune with the road.
So you may have caught onto a theme that the Rogue seems to have more of everything. Well, it does, and that includes price. If we stick just to the Forester I'm driving, the Limited, with the upgrade radio package, it is $6,000 cheaper than the Platinum Rogue. And that Rogue could still have more options on top. That's a significant gap. Now, if you go up to the Touring, which adds some more features that are missing from here that the Rogue has, you're still talking about a $3,000 gap. So it comes down to a matter of, is the extra technology and refinement in the Rogue worth it? In Canada, that gap shrinks a bit. As tested, this Limited versus that Platinum, we're talking about a $3,000 difference. And if we got the fully loaded Premier Forester, the gap would shrink to about $1,000. So we kind of joked at the start how these aren't really compact, but the rear seat space here is crazy. Now, both seats are further forward than we would probably have them, but not much. And there's so much legroom. There's so much headroom. I mean, with this 1.5 size sunroof, there's a little dip down, but I mean, if I sit completely straight, I'm in the roof, but if I sit normal, I'm okay. The armrests seem to be pretty good. The cushion's a little on the low side.
A tiny bit, but I just can't believe how much legroom there is. And also, I mean, it's not much of a transmission tunnel either.
And something that we talk about all the time, and I think people sometimes forget, is how big and square the Forester is. And we have these massive windows, and the roof hardly curls down in our way.
Yeah, that's the impression in the back, is just so much natural light, even with this stopping forward at the passengers. Should we head into the Rogue?
Alrighty, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so now we are in the Rogue, and it's actually much the same. The legroom's, again, really good. It may look like the seats are closer because they are, but that's because they're further from the dash. So I'd say it's a wash there. The cushion seems to be the same height. It's not as high as I'd like, but it's fine. And headroom, again, if I sit right up, there's probably just a little more headroom because I'm not quite touching.
They're remarkably similar. I think the cushion placement is very slightly better in the Forester because I think it's a little higher and a little longer. But otherwise, yeah, it's weird how similar they are. These are pretty narrow armrests, though, I will say.
Yes, the door armrests are worse. I'll give you that. And I feel like the center armrest went longer in the Forester. Like, I feel like the cup was further forward.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to pick between the two, I don't know. This is sort of the theme I'm finding in this comparison. This is the better equipped, more sort of refined feeling back seat. But I kind of think I'd rather spend time in the back of the Forester if I have to. So we've just finished driving for the last week, and it's safe to say both vehicles have improved since we last had them. The Forester even more so.
It's true. I'm really impressed with the Forester. It's never really been my cup of tea, but it is much more refined and quieter than before. But it's not quite as refined and just fancy feeling as the Rogue.
Yeah, this gives you more of a premium feeling in the cabin, when you're driving it especially. And it's got features you can't get in the Forester regardless of trim. But if you go to mid-trim and lower, I think it reverses because the Forester's always been sort of that unassuming, great, easy to live with type vehicle, and it still is, and it's better than it was. But as they stand, this is the winner.